Business Declares. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what Business Declares is later. I'd just like to acknowledge firstly, there are many other things you could be doing today. There are many other events you could be at, and I really appreciate your time and commitment. In fact, by the very fact you're here shows what amazing personal commitment that you have to help tackling what is the greatest challenge of our generation. Now, over the last couple of years, we've become more and more aware of the climate crisis, climate change, and its impacts. And, you know, there really is hardly a day that goes by without some kind of report of a climate-related catastrophe, whether it be flooding, whether it be fire, whether it be some sort of famine, extreme heat, etc. And, you know, it is true that we've always lived with various climate-related issues, but what's different now is there is undeniable evidence about two things. Number one, climate events have become more frequent and more extreme than they ever were. And secondly, the frequency and the level of extremes of these events is driven by human activity. And you may well have seen in the last couple of months a huge number of reports from people like the UN, the UK's own advisors, and those reports have predicted what's going to happen if we don't address the crisis much quicker. And in particular, the unanimous agreement of the need to massively reduce the burning of fossil fuels, which of course is a key cause of CO2. And because of the scale of the problem, we need to attack it on three fronts: governments, businesses, and everyday citizens. And it is the last of these that we want to explore today. So how can the individual really make a difference to the crisis? What is it that's in our day-to-day lives, things that we have some control over and some choice in? So we'll be talking about 5 topics today where individual action can make a difference. Now, these are not meant to be the only 5, but they are certainly 5 of the most important ways in which we can all engage personally. And to highlight each of these, we've got some fantastic speakers, experts in their field, to talk about each topic for the next 25 minutes. And after this, what I'll do is I will chair a Q&A session, and you will have your chance to put those questions to people. So can I ask everyone, please put in the chat any questions that you've got right throughout this this webinar, and we will do our best to get those to the speakers. And just before I come on to the speakers, or as I'm coming on to the speakers, if you are happy to put in the chat which of the 5 Fs are you most interested to learn about: food, fashion, flying, fuel and finance. Which of those really are things that you really want to understand and know more about? If you want to put any comments in the chat on that at this point, that would be great. So just coming on to the speakers, we've got 5 fantastic people. I'm just going to quickly tell you who they are, and then I'm going to hand over to the first slot. So representing food, we have Andy Stevens, and Andy is Head of Sustainable Food at Cook. Representing fashion, we have Safia Mini. Safia is founder of People Tree and Real Sustainability, but Safia is also an advisor, a speaker and an author. Representing flying, we have Todd Smith, who's an ex-pilot and co-founder of Safe Landing. Representing fuel or energy, Kit Dixon from Good Energy, Policy and Regulation Manager. And representing finance or money, we have David Heyman from the group Make My Money Matter. So I will pause there. Andy, I will hand over to your capable hands to take us through the first session on food.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, hi, everyone. So as Ben said, my name's Andy and I work for Cook. Cook is a food company who make remarkable frozen food for your freezer. So that might be a lasagna, a curry, or even Christmas dinner. Yeah, so I'm here to have a chat about the food system and its impact on the climate and ecological emergency. There was a report recently, the National Food Strategy, and it described the food system as both a miracle and a disaster. And I think that's quite a nice summary of where we're at the moment. So the miracle is that we're able to access such a broad, amazing choice of food. So we can go to our local supermarket, our local shop, and we can buy all these different veg, meat, everything like that. But the disaster, the challenge is that this is all coming at a increasing environmental impact. So I've got a few stats here just to quickly go through to highlight what that impact is. So reports suggest that the food system is responsible for about 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions. about half of the world's habitable land is used for agriculture. And it's also predicted that agriculture is responsible for about 80% of tropical deforestation. So that's the disaster. That's the sort of challenge we're facing as citizens, as businesses, when it comes to where our food comes from. And I guess the challenge is only going to get a little bit more difficult because global populations continue to increase. So I think we're around about 7.8 billion people at the moment, but by 2050, that's expected to rise by about another 1.9 billion. So the challenge is, how do we feed all these people without sort of going beyond the environmental boundaries that the planet has? So I'm not going to go into much detail about specifically what I think a food sector can do, because I could probably speak about that for a lot longer than the 5 minutes I have. So yeah, what I'm going to do is just dive into a little bit more detail about a couple of different areas where us as citizens, as individuals, can have an impact. And the first one of those is food waste. So it's estimated that between a quarter and a third of all food produced is wasted at some point. And that food, the production of that food and the emissions associated with that are about 8 to 10% of all the global emissions. So yeah, reducing our food waste and therefore the environmental impact of that is something that we can all have all contribute to. And there's actually a report came out from RAP quite recently, and it actually showed that we've actually been able to do that over lockdown. So a lot of the way that we behaved as citizens around our food changed due to lockdown and the pandemic. And this report suggests that 80% of people adopted positive food management behaviours, and that resulted in a decline of food waste by about 43%. So the great news is that we've actually proven that we're able to drive down food waste in our homes. So these positive food waste management behaviours that we were adopting and should continue to adopt are things like planning ahead where our food's coming from. It's definitely something I started to do more. Writing a shopping list, being more aware of what's in your fridge, your freezer, and your cupboards. Also, like planning in takeaways or eating out, because if you don't plan them in so much, they can displace the food that you have in your fridge, and that might be wasted. A lot of people move to batch cooking. So at a convenient time during the week, they did a big batch cook, and then they portioned it out into 1 or 2 people, whatever's appropriate, and put it in their freezer so it's ready for them. So that's something you could do, or you could use someone like Cook to do it for you. That's my shameless plug. And yeah, other things we could do. There's great apps out there like Olio, Too Good To Go. So these are apps which are connecting people with surplus food. So whether that's you want to other people to use your surplus food, or you want to use other people's surplus food in your cooking. And there's also loads of great charities. So a couple of charities that Cook work with are Food Cycle and Fair Share. So volunteering for people like these will also enable these great charities to get surplus food from places it's not being used to people who really need it. Yeah, so reducing food waste is the first one. The second area, which I'm just going to quickly talk about, is where we can all have an impact, is the reduction of our meat consumption. So yeah, this is definitely a hotly contested topic, but generally reports by scientists, NGOs, they generally all point towards the fact that in order to meet the sort of climate reduction, the carbon reduction targets that we need to, in order to avoid really nasty global warming, we should be reducing our meat consumption. And figures, well, again, the National Food Strategy suggested that a 30% reduction by 2030 would be a good thing to aim at. So this is really up to the individual, and it's definitely not saying that people should stop eating meat altogether, but it's about finding a way to drive down your own meat consumption. So that might be swapping out a beef lasagna for a veggie lasagna. It might be joining campaigns like Meat Free Monday, so you decide not to eat meat during Monday or another day of the week. There's things like going vegan for January. I even did a whole year where I went veggie just to see what that was like. So yeah, I think it's all about finding out what works for you as an individual, buying veggie recipe books and challenging yourself to make veggie food taste just as good as meat so you don't miss the meat. Definitely great resources out there. There's a fellow B Corp, Riverford, who've got amazing recipes on their website about how to cook good veggie food. And also another sort of thing that Cook are doing, so you can sign up to our veg email. So if you go to our website and go to our veggie section, you can sign up to that, and that will champion some of our veggie food, but will also sort of share some interesting reports and information about how people can move to a bit more of a plant-based diet. Yeah, and that's all from me, Ben.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Andy. I love the real gritty, practical examples that you're giving there. There is no reason why most people surely can't pick something out of that lot to actually go and run with after today. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to move on to our next speaker now. We're going to move to Safia to talk about fashion. And I know, Lucy, we've got some slides from Safia now. So we'll just tee those up and then over to you, Safia and Lucy.
Hi, welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I'm going to do a whistle-stop tour through what could climate-friendly fashion look like. If you can move to the next slide, Lucy. So we know that the question around the emissions is between 4 to 8% of greenhouse gas emissions on the current trajectory with other areas of greenhouse gas emissions. It is likely, if we don't change the business model of fashion, that it would increase to 26% by 2050. And we know it's also the second largest polluter in the world. And there are different ways of doing fashion. If we could move to the next slide. So how do we redesign the fashion industry in the climate, social and ecological crisis? And we know that with the COVID pandemic, many fashion brands didn't pay their workers up to £40 billion worth of orders. So this has really impacted the most economically marginalized people within the supply chain. If you could move to the next slide. So when we're looking at the question around decarbonising the fashion industry, we know that more than 80%, closer to 85% of greenhouse gas emissions in the fashion industry is within its supply chains, within scope 3. So any fashion company that tells you, we're doing stuff, we're going to net zero, but we're not factoring in scope 3 or the supply chain, is being very naughty indeed. We absolutely need to push, and there have been lots of discussions around how we legislate around greenwash to ensure that fashion companies are telling the truth. So next slide, please. So I built People Tree as a brand, mindful 30 years ago. It's the 30th anniversary this year, that there was a climate emergency, and that already that climate was impacting many of the organisations, the fair trade organisations and farming organisations that we worked with around the world. If we could move to the next slide. So I set up the brand to make sure that we could work with organic cotton. We were the first company to have Soil Association GOTS organic cotton from farm through to closet. Next slide, please. And we also concentrated on making sure that more than 97% of the materials used were natural materials, natural and organic materials. If we move to the next slide. And just to kind of come back to organic cotton. So what you do when you work in close partnership, and this is what we're hearing many businesses now talking about, working directly with the farmers, directly with their producers and suppliers, is that then you can innovate, change, and you can risk manage, which means that you can build renewable energy sources. You can also positively look at regenerative agriculture and carbon drawdown. So just as an example, by using drip irrigation, one can reduce water consumption by 60%, at the same time as providing fair wages for farmers and premiums for organic. If you move to the next slide, please. So this relationship of building strength with the supply chain, the members, all of the stakeholders, is becoming now a very central theme of not just of the food industry, but it's also now moving through to textiles and fashion. I'm working on a book called Regenerative Fashion, which is really looking at this movement. Move to the next slide, if you would. And of course, regenerative agriculture, we know that we can draw down about as much carbon as we're generating if we switch all of agriculture. So as Andy was saying, if we switch agriculture, both for food and for textile, to regenerative, ideally regenerative organic agriculture, that would make a huge difference at the same time as reducing our demand and production of fashion. If you could move to the next slide. So we know that within the fashion industry, we've had a huge awareness build around plastics, but most of what we wear, 2/3 of what we wear, is actually plastic. And every time we wash a load, we are shedding microfibers that are between 1 and 5 millimeters long, which are now found in the most pristine environments throughout the world. Next slide, please. So we're looking at how we can reduce water consumption, how we can reduce the chemical consumption. If we can go on to the next slide, we can't afford 2,700 litres of water to produce a t-shirt. That's as much as it would cost to keep people in drinking water for 2.5 years. We can use craft skills. This is hand weaving. Lovely Emma Watson, when we did a collaboration with her when she was 19, 20 years old. Next slide, please. So using craft skills can actually help to build strong livelihoods in economically disadvantaged areas and provide that transition to a just economy for fashion. Next slide, please. And building this close partnership can make all the difference to really understanding what needs to change in order to be able to reduce carbon and to reduce pollution at the same time as bringing living wages and social impact to people, the 60 million people throughout the supply chain. Next slide, please. So I'm going to whiz through this. These are some of the, of course, there's also B Corp, which are extremely good. If we could move to the next slide. Sorry, I know I'm running out of time. We know in this time of global heating that we have to reduce fashion consumption. What it will mean is reducing what we produce by as much as 75 to 95%. So how we do that in a just way is really key. Next slide, please. So we know that secondhand will be as big as fast fashion by 2030. That's really exciting. Next slide, please. We know that repair services are going to not just be, these wonderful ethical brands, but also will move into supermarkets and other areas. We'll be able to repair in our communities. Next slide, please. And overall, that the Sustainable Development Goals will be something that we, as an 18th Sustainable Development Goal, as I've argued right from the beginning, which is about advocating for change and bringing those goals into our community. Next, and I think last slide now. Oops, sorry, no, it's not the last. We know that fashion has been trying to cancel itself in different parts. So we know that Stockholm Fashion Week cancelled itself, and we know that we've been drawing questions to London Fashion Week to completely redesign the system of fashion, as it is totally unsustainable as we know it today, totally built on fossil fuels, which are responsible for 89% of greenhouse gas emissions today. So what can you do? If we move on to the next slide, we're going to move to shrinking into the donut economics, which means really bringing the fashion industry back into planetary boundaries whilst delivering a fair and just world for everyone. Sorry, next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. I'm so sorry, this is way too long. So what you can do immediately is please, please, please do not buy anything if it's made of plastic. Polyester, nylon, we have to phase it out. That's what we've built the fast fashion industry on. Drastically cut our consumption and production. We need to switch to buying secondhand. And if we're buying new clothes, please buy ethical, fair trade clothes that are low impact and recycled materials. And please be audacious. Please raise awareness amongst your friends and family and take action wherever you can. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Safia. I think what struck me most there was the magnitude of the impact on the world of fashion, which perhaps not everyone is aware of. And then secondly, some really gritty, pragmatic things to do around what not to buy and what to buy, i.e. secondhand. Let's move on to our third speaker here. Todd, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ben, and thanks for hosting this event. So yeah, just a little bit of background for me. It's worth saying that growing up on a council estate in Essex, you know, it comes with a particular accent. And when I was working as a airline pilot, out of the entire flight, the part that made me most anxious was actually the passenger announcement. So I can say that I don't really enjoy public speaking, but this is nonetheless an important message. I guess the difference between this and flying is no matter how bad my PA, I was only ever judged by the landing regardless. So, but yeah, there we go. So I've always wanted to fly since my earliest memories. When I was 5 years old, I made that decision. And for a long time, it looked like I wasn't able to achieve that goal off the back of the 2008 recession. 5 years in flight training and 2 years as a flying instructor, I finally got the break into the airline world. And just a few years into the airline world, I was actually medically grounded, and part of that was a diagnosis of Lyme disease, which has become much more prevalent due to our milder winters and our warmer summers. So when I was grounded, I did a lot of research and became environmentally aware. And I think COVID was very much the final straw for me. You know, I realized our human vulnerabilities, and I felt compelled to be a part of the solution. Even though I had a huge training debt, I realized that I could no longer return to flying passenger jets. So I also noticed there was no representation from workers in carbon heavy industries in the environmental movement, and often workers did not understand the facts. This is largely due to the huge industry lobbies and the misrepresentation on websites as well. So why is flying so damaging to our environment? Firstly, like they plan to triple their emissions, so real emissions, by 2050. And the sector that currently is about 6% of the total greenhouse gases will make up 25% of global CO2 emissions. And by 2050, that's without factoring in the non-CO2 emissions, which actually heat Earth at a rate 3 times that of CO2 alone. Also, the industry is heavily reliant on ineffective carbon offsets and unsustainable biofuels to reach net zero. And I would probably hazard a guess here and say that most people in this room have taken at least one flight in their lifetime. And actually, not many people are aware that over 80% of the world's people have never even stepped foot on an aircraft. And of course, of those 80%, they're going to be disproportionately affected by the effects of the climate ecological emergency. So the United Nations say that by 2030, we need to be about 2 tons per annum as an individual to be sustainable. And I realized that when I flew from London to Bangkok as a passenger in economy, that return flight cost me 3.5 tons of CO2 alone. So, you know, there are generally no green solutions to the aviation problem, and long haul makes up about 80% of emissions. That's the most challenging hurdle. And there literally are no solutions on the drawing board that can solve that problem right now. So it's going to go many decades into the future. The misinformation and greenwash is rife, and conscious consumers are being misled. For instance, Shell have coined this term sustainable aviation fuel, and there's not really much sustainable about it. There is a competition watchdog that are looking at increasing regulations from next year to stop airlines propagating misinformation. But it's worth saying that just 1% of the population globally create 50% of the aviation demand. So it is just like this polluting elite, the biggest part of the problem. And it's not so much like the low-income households who have saved up their hard-earned cash for that one trip to the Canary Islands, for instance. So in terms of the solution on an individual level, I think it's mostly about pragmatic decision making in the context of the climate and ecological emergency. Ultimately, flying is the most intensive energy intensive activity per hour that a human can embark on, unless of course you're going to buy a ticket and go off on a SpaceX flight. But if you do fly frequently, then it's likely to be the biggest contributor to your carbon footprint. So I guess it's just about asking yourself, is this flight or this destination essential? Can the journey be taken by a low carbon ground-based alternative? And can you ask your employer to support incentives for low carbon travel, including additional days holiday? There's an incentive called Climate Perks. I'm going to post the link in the chat. Also, when was your last flight? Are you flying frequently? Just being very conscious and aware. There's another initiative by Flight Free UK. You can take a pledge to take a year out of flying, and this is really effective to pass on a ripple effect to your family and friends as well. And lastly, just to say, if you do know any aviation workers, we've recently set up a worker-led movement and we're trying to challenge the growth narrative and highlight any false solutions. So please do send them to Safe Landing, our new organisation. I'll pop the LinkedIn link in the chat as well. So I'll leave it there. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Todd. Fantastic. Again, you know, the magnitude of what this industry and what this activity does to the planet. Again, you know, a lot of us probably not aware. The fact that it's the frequent flyers and obviously the long hauls that are causing the biggest issue, and I guess the stuff to take away, as Todd has said, you know, if there is one thing to take away from here that I've taken away, it's, you know, think about the implications and the choices that you're making on this. It may ultimately not change your decision, but at least you should think about it. Let's move on to Kit. Over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks to Ben and Lucy at Business Declares for having me. And it's great to see so many people on the call that are engaged in the subject of climate action. It's really promising. My name's Kit. I'm the Policy and Regulation Manager at Good Energy. So we're a renewable energy company. We've been around for about 20 years, helping individuals and businesses generate and use their own renewable energy, reduce their emissions and fight climate change. So I'm here to talk about fuel or energy, what we can all do to in terms of the way we use it to help secure a sustainable future. I'm also aware that energy has been in the news a lot over the last few days. So if people have any questions about what's going on at the moment, I will try to fill them as best I can if you put them in the chat. We'll see what we can do. Yeah, so energy is one of the largest contributors to carbon emissions in the UK. And breaking that down, what do I mean by energy use? Keeping things fairly straightforward. Splits into three parts: electricity use, the energy we use to heat our homes and businesses, and also the energy we use to get around, so transport fuels. And these three things contribute about 2/3 of UK emissions. But there are many things that we can do as individuals to minimise our own contribution to that. And in doing so, voting with our feet, I guess, showing companies and governments that we want more products, more initiatives that will allow us to fight climate change. So I guess I'll start with like, what's the number one easiest way to fight climate change through your energy use? And it might be kind of funny coming from somebody who works for an energy company, but the best unit of energy is one that you don't use at all. It doesn't mean going cold in the winter, and it doesn't mean limiting yourself to 3 cups of tea a day. I know I wouldn't cope very well with that, but what I mean is investigating in things like energy efficiency measures, upgrades you can make to your home or your business so you have to use less gas and less electricity to heat. Everything from double glazing all the way through to wall insulation would reduce the amount that you need to buy. If you can use less electricity at certain times of day as well, most likely in the kind of early evening when everybody else is using it, that also has an enormous positive impact. In terms of transport, walking or cycling instead of driving, we use an awful lot of fuel or energy powering our vehicles. And even if you have an electric vehicle, if there's a trip that you can cover by foot instead, you're reducing your fuel use. The second best way is to use energy that you've created yourself. So solar panels went through a bit of a boom about 10 years ago in the UK because of a government scheme called the feed-in tariff. People could get paid to generate and export power to the grid. And that's great because you're contributing green energy for others to use. But actually, what's the best thing about self-generation is you can use that power yourself, and then you're reducing the amount of energy you have to buy from the grid, from suppliers. And that saves you money on your bills, and it also reduces the strain that you're putting on the grid, making for a more efficient system overall. And that's a really positive thing in terms of emissions and climate change as well. Now, unless you've got an enormous solar array or a large battery, it's quite likely that even if you are generating power yourself, you're still going to need to get some power and gas from the grid. And that's where finding a really genuinely renewable supplier of electricity is incredibly important. Many suppliers in the UK sell 100% renewable tariffs. But what does that really mean? Well, because when you switch supplier, we don't come out to your house and connect you to a different set of wires that's only connected to renewable generation. We all share the same power grid. So what's important is that your supplier is using your money or bills to generate or buy renewable power from generators, and put the same amount of power that you use back into the grid. And that's our promise that we make to our customers. We match every unit of power that our customers use with a unit that's purchased or generated ourselves or purchased directly from a renewable generator. We work with about 1,600 pretty small generators. So if we get a new customer, bottom line is we have to go out and buy more renewables. And that way, a big chunk of your bill is contributing to green power. You might think, well, yes, yeah, obviously, don't all renewable suppliers do that? But unfortunately, the answer is no. There are lots of people selling 100% renewable products that don't actually buy any power from renewable generators, and they're able to sell brown power, so coal or gas power, as renewable because of a kind of regulatory loophole. And we don't have loads of time to go into that now, but I can drop a link in the chat if people are interested to see how that works in a bit more detail. But in the meantime, I guess when you sign up for a green tariff, whichever supplier you approach, I would strongly advise you to ask the following question. You say, whoever it is, how much power do you buy directly from renewable generators, or do you generate yourself? And if the answer isn't all of it, then in our view, it wouldn't be a genuine product. So I guess to recap, number one, use less. See if you can make your home more efficient in order to use less energy to begin with. If possible, it can be quite expensive up front, but look into generating electricity yourself, because that has benefits both financial for you in terms of the carbon that you emit, and also for the efficiency of the grid in general. And thirdly, make sure the energy that you do buy, that you do get from the grid, is coming from a genuinely renewable place, and you aren't being greenwashed. But yeah, that's it from me, Ben.
Thank you, Kit. Well, you've done the sum up, so you saved me the job. Real pragmatic stuff there, so really appreciate that. And let's move on to David to talk about our last subject, which is money or finance. David, over to you. And I think you've got a video, is that right?
I do, yeah. I'll be playing that about halfway through.
Okay, cool.
And thanks, Ben, and thanks, team. I don't know if it's a nice way to end on finance and pensions specifically, or it's punishment to make people wait for this, but I hope we can make it more interesting, because we are a campaign called Make My Money Matter, and we're trying to help people understand the power of their money, the power of their pensions particularly, and give individuals more voice and choice in where our money goes. And ultimately, in doing so, we think that can help influence the decisions of banks, of financial institutions, and of ultimately pension funds, to make sure our money is tackling the climate crisis rather than fueling the fire. And it's really interesting today. We've heard from a variety of people about the many steps that individuals are taking or considering taking to help kind of tackle the climate crisis, and be that the food they eat, the clothes they wear, how they travel, how they get their energy, the brands they associate with, and the organizations they work for. But one of the most neglected areas is actually where we put our money and the impact that money has. Most people assume that their money is sat, their pensions, their bank accounts sat in a bank vault somewhere in Switzerland, slowly accruing interest. And in 40 years' time, they might draw that down and hopefully have a safe pot to retire on. But the reality is that our money is invested around us for good and for bad, invested in companies building and shaping the world. And we believe that it's fundamentally important that every individual knows where their money goes and has more power to exercise their voice and choice about what kind of impact that has. And so the reason we talk about pensions, there's kind of three main reasons why we think it's so important. First is the size and scale. In the UK alone, there's £3 trillion invested through our pensions industry. It's $50 trillion globally. It's an extraordinary amount of money, and that is our money. That doesn't belong to financial institutions. That doesn't belong to big, powerful people. This is our money. And we believe that we should have a say over where that 3 trillion in the UK, where that $50 trillion globally goes. Secondly, and a kind of point that may have come up a little bit today, is the concept of being an accidental investor, that through our pensions and through our savings, oftentimes we find ourselves accidental investors in the practices we avoid or the issues we fight against in our day-to-day lives. So, part of the reason the campaign was set up was the stories of vegans who were in fact invested through their pensions in factory farming, of doctors who were treating the victims of lung cancer, but who were invested in the tobacco industry causing those diseases. And very poignantly in the UK, of XR protesters who invested in the fossil fuel companies who they are fighting against. And this kind of accidental dichotomy, this accidental hypocrisy between our actions and our money is one that we feel that we really, really need to look into and empower people to align their money with their values. And third is the potential for impact. Now, this might be controversial given we've heard from other speakers here, but we've done a piece of research which found that moving your money from a default standard pension where 95% of the population are to a greener, cleaner fund has 21 times more impact than giving up flying and becoming a vegetarian combined. Now, that's not to say not to do those really important steps, but it is to say that we should be making sure that our money should be aligning with those activities, should be complementing those activities and not undermining them, and they should all be done together and done in parallel. So the kind of three reasons we think it's really important. And so what we're doing about it as a campaign is firstly trying to tell this story, kind of get the public interested and excited about the power of their money. And I'm going to show a video now which does this in a much better way than I can do about how we try and make it fun, interesting and engaging for members of the public to think about their pensions.
Hello, I'm Desmond, an old-style default pension.
And I'm Susan, a nice new-style sustainable pension.
The great advantage with me is that you're probably already invested in me and I can save you the whole bother of changing.
It's not really a great bother changing, and it will probably not make you totally happy when you find out that with him, you could be investing in coal,
Right.
arms manufacturers,
Boom!
gambling,
If it's good enough for Ray Winston.
deforestation,
What have trees ever done for us?
pornography.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So if you're bothered that you might inherit a pension in a world on fire, why not bother to make sure your money is working every day to make things better?
Shut up now, please.
So that was Robert Webb and Lolly Adepope helping to kind of get this message out there about the power of our money. So we try and tell the story creatively to members of the public and get them engaged and excited about their money. Secondly, we try and have conversations with businesses, corporates, some of whom are on this call today, about aligning their company pension schemes with their values as well. There's £20 billion invested every year through company pensions, but we think only about 5% of companies do anything to align their pension contributions to their organizational sustainability strategies or their priorities. So last couple of months ago, we launched something called the Green Pensions Charter, trying to encourage all businesses to make sure that their pensions are net zero and tackling the climate crisis. And any businesses who are interested, please get in touch and we can talk more about what that means. And then ultimately, we try and use the pressure of public engagement and corporates looking at their money to go to the pensions industry and try and shift how our investments are made at a macro level. Because ultimately we're not a shifting campaign, we're not a switching campaign, we're not trying to get 5% of the population into a nice green fund, which would be great. We actually want to make sure all of the £3 trillion invested through our pensions is building a world fit for our retirement, a world we actually want to grow old in. So we've had some real success since the campaign launched, with some big net zero commitments from leading pension providers, organizations committing to green their company schemes, and thousands of people starting to look at where their money's invested and put pressure on. And I guess the kind of call to action, what you can do, I think the first is to ask the question, find out where your money is invested and what kind of impact it's having. If you're not happy with that option, if you're not happy with what you find, I think you can lobby your pension provider to change for the better. And we've got tools on our website which will help you do that. Or you can try and find a product which better aligns with your values. If you're an organization, you should look at where your company scheme is invested, and again, sign up to our Green Pensions Charter, advocate for change with your pension provider. And I think the third is talk about this, talk about money, talk about finances, talk about pensions to friends and family, because this is a often misunderstood and not very vocalized topic, but we think it's extremely powerful. So I'll kind of leave it there.
Thank you very much, David. And again, a great sum up. The enormity of this topic is one perhaps that people hadn't quite appreciated those numbers. £3 trillion in the UK and 50 trillion globally of our money, not banks' money, our money. We are extremely tight for time, but I want to make sure that we get at least 5 questions or so in. Thank you everybody from some phenomenal questions. I'm just going to go back in order, going back to Andy, and I'm just going to ask each of our speakers One question to start with that's coming from the audience, and I will need a fairly quick response so that we can get through everybody. So if we talk about food, Andy, one of the questions, which is also one that I've been mulling over as well, is this: are food miles the most important factor in helping reduce emissions from the industry, or is it not as simple as that? If you could give a sort of 60-ish second answer.
It's not as simple as that. So definitely buying local can have a big impact. But there are, one example is, for example, tomatoes grown in winter. So research suggests that actually transporting them from Spain might have a lower carbon impact there. So unfortunately, with a lot of things in food, it's not as simple as food miles. Definitely buying local, buying seasonal is a good way to go. But yeah, it's sort of, sometimes you need to look a little bit more under the bonnet about when making those sort of decisions.
All right, thank you. If we could just move on to fashion, a quick question for you, Safia. How do we regulate retailers? And an example given such as Primark, but I guess there could be many others. How could that regulation work to create more ethical fashion?
I mean, it's the big question, isn't it? There are various initiatives. There's one in the EU that might come into being here. There are the food traffic light system. You know, that some people are talking about something similar for fashion. We need to put teeth behind some parts of legislation that are already in place, both in terms of modern slavery and also in terms of transparency and director duties. There's also, I think, a big question, which is about carbon taxation. So, you know, if carbon were taxed at $75, we would then have a very different, that pillar built on fossil fuels would then come away. So synthetics, also synthetic pesticides and fertilizer would then fall away. So I think, you know, there are lots of different triggers, but unfortunately we don't have anything yet. The greenwash part is also, I think, part of that that process and accountability of fashion companies.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So again, mix of answers, not that straightforward right now, but hopefully we're moving to it. Todd, I've got two questions for you, just because I can't really choose between them, and I think they're really good questions, and they should hopefully be quite straightforward for you to answer, or maybe not. I'll ask them both. Is Jet Zero possible, and should we tax frequent flyers?
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, basically, the short answer is no. Jet Zero is just a really, you know, clever marketing scheme for the government. Essentially, of that entire policy, just 4% of the flights will be zero emission flights, and the reality is BA have just launched, they're having a flight to COP from London to Glasgow, which is non-essential anyway because there's good rail links, but that flight's going to be saving about 60% of emissions with so-called sustainable aviation fuel, but there's just not enough of that feedstock available globally and it's 8 times the cost of kerosene as well. So leading on to the tax, what we need is ideally an international tax on kerosene across the board, and additionally a frequent flyer tax levy, so the people that are doing most damage absolutely have to pay for it. That money could be ring-fenced to drive insulation, retrofitting, public transport and social care. So it's a non-brainer, really.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Really interesting observations there. Just moving on to fuel, and I know Kit, that you've put something on this in the chat, but maybe you could just slightly elaborate on this one. It's about finding a genuine supplier easily and avoid greenwashing. What are the sort of takeaways for people could go, yeah, I get that, I know how I can do that?
Right, so I think the first thing that you should do is speak to whoever your supplier is currently, or whoever you are thinking about switching to, and asking them that question about how much of the electricity that they supply has been procured directly from a renewable generator. And And if the answer they give you is something to do with certificates, then you should start to raise your eyebrows, because the way greenwashing in the energy industry works is every time a unit of green energy is created, a certificate is issued to that generator, and then that generator is able to sell the power and the certificate entirely separately. And the certificate is what the government uses to kind of mark people's homework about how green their supply is. So it could be that a energy supplier buys all their power from a gas plant, but just buys a load of these certificates, slaps them on the power and says, that's green. And as far as the regulations go, as far as the law is concerned, that is legitimate at the moment. It's going to change, but it probably won't for the next 12, 18 months. So what you should ask them is, are they trading those separately or together? Do they buy power from a renewable generator? And if the answer is no, then look elsewhere.
Okay, really, really good. Thank you very much for that. For finance, I'm going to ask David a quick question, and then I'd just like to bring in Ed Grattan from Triodos Bank as well, just to add a couple of things to that. So, David, kind of similar to the last question, really. This is all about the public out there. They just want to work out how they get to the right answer. So how do we know which pension provider is good? What is the Bible? What is the way of understanding this?
Yeah, it's the question we get asked most, and I probably have the most frustrating answer to, so apologies in advance. I mean, for us, one of our key asks, a simple way of doing this, one of our key fundamental asks of the campaign is for pension providers to commit to really robust, ambitious net zero targets. We think that's not a perfect solution, but a good proxy to show real progress on the climate agenda. And for us, that looks like halving of emissions in the next decade, pulling out of coal, ambitious use of their voice as stakeholders to engage members and put pressure on the investee companies and reduce emissions urgently. So that for us is a good catch-all proxy on the climate agenda. And there are 17 providers since we've launched have made those commitments. You can find out more on our website who those are and what those look like, and there's some real progress there. I think the second point about what good looks like, I think part of the campaign is for individuals to answer that question for themselves. You know, we've heard from people for whom investing in tobacco is an absolute no-go because they have family members who have been affected by lung cancer, for example. We've heard of climate campaigners who do not want in any way to be associated with fossil fuel companies, even if they are transitioning, even using their voice to pressure them to transition faster. I've heard people who have similar feelings about alcohol or about pornography, about deforestation, about fast fashion. And so there's no kind of perfect, this is good, this is bad. We're not here to tell everyone where your priorities should sit. What we're here to do is to kind of encourage people to ask that question and to put pressure on their provider on the particular area that they feel most powerfully and feel is most important to them.
Thank you. And again, there's a bit of a theme here that, you know, as consumers, we do have power. And actually there is a lot of data around for us to use. But let's not forget our voice in this as a consumer. It's our money and it's our life, and we do have the power. And quite often, you know, perhaps we don't realise quite how much we do. Ed, just wanted to bring you in from a green bank, Triodos. Just to make a couple of comments from your perspective as a provider, just for say literally a minute and a half.
Sure. Yeah. Hi everyone. Great discussion so far. And yeah, to build on the fifth F there of finance, there is of course above and beyond pensions, there is your current account, your savings, your stocks and shares investments, if you're lucky enough to have those. And the trillions that are in pensions that David mentioned, many trillions, if you look at that amount of money that is moving around, and that it does belong to you. So I would point to a couple of resources. I think maybe the leading assessment in finance, but also in many other areas, comes from Ethical Consumer magazine, who've done this research for years and years now. I keep a copy of their special edition they do on banking and finance on my desk, but I'll put a link to the PDF version of that in the chat, because that's an excellent resource. But more recently, you've seen some great websites focusing in particularly on which are the kind of big fossil fuel banks versus the less so ones. So you can go to bank.green, you can go to switchit.money. Those are both kind of resources that have started up recently, just to give people some advice on how their bank's doing. And if it's not doing well, then I'd say write to them, communicate, but also switch, and then tell them about it when you do switch to a better bank. When it comes to the other one would be Which have just come out with some ratings as well, which is great to see. So that's kind of a bit more mainstream. I'd like to see even more mainstream stuff going on. So something everyone on this discussion could do is write to Martin Lewis and say, why aren't you talking about sustainability on your huge TV show? He's never addressed it once in why people might want to choose a factor. So he just goes after the 100 quid, incentivizing bonuses those banks are coming from. But what if those banks are paying for those incentives by funding deforestation, big fossil fuels, etc.? So I'd love to see him, as a big consumer trusted champion to address some of this stuff. And I think he just needs people to write to him.
Thank you. Ed, I'm going to have to cut in there. I'm really sorry because I need to get this through to 1 o'clock. But I loved your point on ethical consumer. The data is out there. Let's just go find it. And I loved your point about writing to Martin Lewis, and maybe we can all do that and create a mass action straight after this call. Who knows? But thank you. I'm sorry to cut you off, Ed. Sorry to cut you off. Okay. Firstly, can I just thank all the speakers and thank everyone on the audience today who have put in their questions and the level of engagement. We have hundreds more questions, and we could easily have gone on for another hour. I don't know whether anyone would have been able to stay though, but real great engagement, which again is testimony to the commitment on the call today. So thank you very much for that. In a second, I'm going to ask each of the speakers to give us one sentence of one thing that they want you, the audience, to take away today. So if you could get ready, speakers, a bit of thinking time for you, one last message that you want to leave people with, and that will be the end. Can I ask people in the audience though, also one thing, could you put in the chat the one important action you feel that you can do as a result of today? So if you could keep that coming in the chat, that would be fantastic. And I'll come to the speakers in a second. Just while you're doing that, I said I would mention something about business declares, and Lucy, if we could just go to a couple of slides, but we won't go to, I don't think we'll go to the website. I'm just slightly conscious of time here. So business declares, we're a not-profit organisation. We are focused on helping businesses, and of course all businesses are made of individuals. We're focused on helping businesses raise awareness of the climate, ecological and social crisis that we're in, and most importantly, take action to address the crisis. We've got a huge range of organisations in our network, from faith groups to finance, food to fashion, security to consulting. There is no charge for joining Business Declares, because there shouldn't be a barrier for getting people together, sharing good practice, such as we're doing today. There shouldn't be a barrier to tackle the climate crisis. We do, though, look for donations to keep us funded. And if you think that anything you've heard today has been useful and informative at an individual level, then why not talk to Business Declares about carrying on the conversation, either with you as an individual or perhaps, and importantly, your employer. We've had a lot of questions in the chat today about how to change employers' views, how to influence from within, and there's a lot I could say about that as something that I've been quite close to. So please contact me. Please make a general inquiry to Business Declares. We also have an event on the 2nd of November where organisations can come and find out more. And again, please let me know if that's something that you would like to take part in. So I'd like to carry on the conversation with as many people as possible. One other quick thing before we go to the speakers, and we're coming to the speakers in about 10 seconds, is there is a feedback form which Lucy will put a link to in the chat. Anyone who can possibly just spend 20 seconds filling that in would be really helpful for us. But by way of close, I'll do quick fire, 10 seconds, 15 seconds to each speaker. What is the one thing you want to leave this audience with? Andy?
Yeah, plan your food consumption and think about cutting down food waste and meat consumption. Thank you. Safia?
The most sustainable clothes are the ones that you own. So please buy secondhand, recycle, repair, swap, upcycle. If you're going to buy new, make sure that it's the most sustainable and fair trade brand if you can.
Thank you. Todd?
Given that long haul flights are the most damaging and short haul flights can often be taken by rail, is it really essential? And given that, for instance, 99% of coral reef could be dead at 2 degrees of warming in less than 30 years, do you really want to go to that long haul destination to witness a collapse of biodiversity, etc.?
Thank you. And David?
That your pension is powerful. It's not sat in a bank vault somewhere. It's actually invested around the world. So find out where it's invested and what impact it's having.
Great, thank you. And Kit?
Make sure your supplier is investing in renewable generation, and also look around your home and see if you can make it more efficient, because like I said, the best energy is stuff you don't use.
Great. Thank you to the speakers. Thanks to the audience. Thanks to Lucy and the team behind the scenes. Thanks to the Climate Coalition for enabling us to be part of this event. We've got to 1 o'clock on the nose. Thank you for everyone's contribution. Have a great rest of the day, and take those actions that we've talked about today. Thanks, guys. Take care.